Hey guys! Part 2 of What If Naruto Was Immortal and Existed Even Before the Gods Themselves. Hit like and subscribe if you like this one, and also please check the author in the description. Let's start. Chapter 13, Calm Before the Punpocalypse. The Journey to the West has always been acclaimed as probably the greatest piece of fiction to ever emerge from the East. Its author Wu Qing'an has written it as an allegory for enlightenment after taking inspiration from various Buddhist, Taoist, and Hindu texts. As one of the four great classical novels of Chinese literature, it has always stood as a national treasure to this great Eastern civilization and has served to inspire many popular pieces of literature and entertainment. Although one aspect of the book that always perplexes me is the lack of a solid reference for the characters of Sun Wukong. Amongst his many names were the Monkey King and the Great Sage Equal to Heaven. The one blasphemous demon whose actions lead him from a war with the gods down a path to earn repentance, and eventually, enlightenment and ascension into Buddhahood. There were very few mentions, even in the most obscure or apocryphal of religious and historic texts, of such a creature, barring the tale of the Nine Lords. Many of the Monkey King's feats, however, whether it be the birth of stone, the strife with the almighty Jade Emperor, and even the storming of the underworld, were attributed to another figure, a cryptid by the standards of historians and one of the lesser-known myths. The gallant sage of the East was known under many monikers as well. Although no personal name for the figure had ever been recorded, he struck a distinctly different figure from that of the Monkey King. To such a degree that one might dare to call Sun Wukong nothing but a caricature, a bastardized rewritten version of one of the champions of humanity. The following thesis will be attempting to explore through different sources, be it Shinto, Taoist, Buddhist, Hindu, and even shaman and Tingri texts. The lives of both individuals will be laid bare in all the details that could be compiled, and comparisons will be established between them. To distinguish the differences and parallels that exist between the fictional Sun Wukong and the mythical gallant sage of the East, and to discuss the reasons for the different portrayals of the two characters. Extract from a thesis on history of Chinese literature by Dr. J.R., Hong Kong, 1956. Auntie M's Garden Gnome Emporium, 25th of September, 2000. At the creak of dawn, as the night sky started to light up gradually, a flash of silver illuminated the front of the building and its surrounding trees, startling critters and causing them to scurry back in their holes. Artemis, clad in a larger version of her huntress attire that fit over her adult form, observed the emporium with a critical eye. It's been almost a month since she'd last checked up on the gaggle of demigods and the two strangers that had caused her sister headaches. With every visit to Athena's temple, the option of turning the blonde man and his son into jackalopes had gotten more and more tempting. If only to prove to the wise goddess that no, the Shinto were not trying to brainwash Greek demigods into acting as double agents. Yeah. Athena was in a bad spot, which was why she had finally decided to be more proactive and simply uncover the truth. Turning the tourists into prey would be neat too. In any case, the goddess of the hunt, true to her namesake, had quickly found their current location and noted the extra companion they'd picked up. However, instead of confronting them, she had chosen to retrace their steps in the hopes of finding any significant clues they left behind to bring to her wiser sister. As such, she'd gotten here, in front of the place she knew was the lair of a certain snake-haired monster. She couldn't very well call herself the huntress if she couldn't keep track of her prey now, could she? She'd chosen to leave Medusa to her devices decades ago, as she looked to have been content to stay stationary and not actively hunt mortals or demigods, besides the unfortunate few that encountered her, that is. Oh well, nothing she could do about that. Breaking out of her thoughts, she let her senses sweep over the area, quickly noting a few oddities. The front sign on the ground, the destroyed far wall that looked as if something had smashed it from the inside, the multitudes of small stone slabs surrounding the premises, and the most intriguing detail yet. No trace of Medusa. Not a scent, sound, sight, or energy signature. None, zilch, nada. Strange, she thought with narrowed eyes, putting her hands on her hips and adopting a sterner expression. The sight in front of her clearly meant a fight had gone down, on that Medusa had lost, but the issue lied with how she had lost. There was no way the three demigods could have beaten the monster and come out unharmed. One was not much older than a toddler, The other was a lanky boy who didn't look all that impressive, a satyr that looked like he would run from a fight with a poodle, and the last, but also probably the most likely cause of Medusa's disappearance, was a daughter of Zeus. However, the problem with such a theory was, again, the fact none of the group was visibly injured the last time she saw them. Medusa was akin to an ambush predator, and, as much as Artemis didn't want to admit it, the snake-haired monster would not be caught off guard by a gaggle of demigods without proper training. Which left her with. The deity narrowed her eyes and approached one of the several stone slabs to inspect it more closely. As she knelt before one, she saw no inscription on it besides a symbol engraved into it. A quick look at the others showed they all had the same symbol etched into them. A simple swirl contained within 2 concentric circles. The goddess furrowed her brows at the sight, attempting to recall anything that would relate to it. Unfortunately, nothing came to mind. Sighing at this, she resolved to take one of the slabs to Athena so she could analyze it. However, as her hands touched the stone, her eyes widened as she felt trace amounts of nature energy coursing through it. "This isn't a natural stone," the goddess muttered in surprise. What she meant was that the stone itself wasn't taken from the ground by human hands, but seemed to be formed by unnatural means. Wait, wasn't this place filled with statues before? The goddess hurriedly put her hands to the ground to send a pulse of energy out in an attempt to locate the missing statues. She was further surprised when she felt the telltale signatures of natural energy emitted by the petrified victims in the ground. In front of the slabs. It didn't take her long to come to the obvious conclusion: the slabs were tombstones. Her subjects of interest had apparently seen fit to bury the petrified victims, and erect a small memorial for each of them. This obviously raised a number of questions, especially considering Artemis knew that none in the group, bar possibly the demigod of Hermes, it could be a similar case to Pan, rare as it would be. The satyr, an unlikely case as well considering she knew they could affect vegetation at most, or the 2 mysteries that had her sister running in circles. Seemed they weren't mortals after all. Looking once more at the stone, she briefly debated taking it with her before deciding, reluctantly, to respect the gesture towards the dead and leave the tombstone in place. She had new information for her sister, and she'd be lying if she said she wasn't more curious herself now. Unbeknownst to the deity, even with her enhanced senses, a pair of yellow eyes watched her from the shadow of a nearby tree, completely camouflaged in the darkness. As the goddess vanished from sight, only one thought dominated the spy's mind. "I gotta warn Original," the hidden Zetsu clone, who had stumbled on the deity by chance, thought in alarm. Morganville, New Jersey, same day. Grover was high on life. He's had a wide smile on his face for a while now. And how could he not? He had found not 1, not 2, but 3 demigods. He felt like the luckiest satyr alive at the moment. He was practically a shoo-in for that sweet searcher license, even if the 3 did come with their own set of problems. Like Talia's unusually strong scent, he'd assumed she was a kid of the big 3 but didn't want to get his hopes up, or the fact they had 2 mortals accompanying them, which wasn't unheard of. But with them smelling and feeling like his own kinsmen, as well as the shorter blonde causing some involuntary shudders to rack through his body, Grover had been left confused on what to think of the 2. Were they enemies? Monsters in disguise? The 3 demigods did not seem to think they were dangerous, and if they spent months together prior to meeting him, that was probably the case. But he couldn't shake the instinctual feeling that something was wrong here. Especially with the younger Uzumaki. He felt a nagging sensation whenever he looked at him, as if there was something he should remember about him that he could not. Oh well, it was probably nothing but his jitters. "Mr. Naruto, my feet hurt." The satyr tilted his head at the group's youngest as she walked up to the blonde father and tugged his pants, face stuck in what Grover saw as an absolutely adorable pout. "Oh well, maybe I could dash." The nature spirit was about to offer to give the girl a piggyback ride, both out of a sense of duty and because the child was someone you just couldn't say no to. He was beaten to the punch by the, arguably, eldest of the group. Grover was in his mid-20s technically, but the man must have been older to have raised a teenage son. "Oh ho? Well, we can't have that. Come on, little Annie. Upsy daisy." With a squeal, the little girl was grabbed from under her armpits and thrown up into the air. She was thrown a bit too high for Grover's comfort before she fell down and landed on the larger blonde's shoulders. Hee! That was fun! The girl's previously quiet attitude had all but disappeared, leaving behind a laughing child like any other. She quickly tightened her hold on the man's head and grabbed fistfuls of his spiky hair, pulling at it as if to guide the man like some common steed. Said father didn't seem bothered, however. If anything, he made a comical horse-like neigh, grabbed onto the girl's feet, and started walking with a kick in his step. All this elicited a giggle from the little blonde who held on to her steed's hair. It warmed the satyr's heart. Annie! Come on! You can't just keep asking Mr. Whiskers for rides whenever you get tired. Talia grunted in fatigue, showing she wasn't much better off than the girl, but that was only because of the supplies she was carrying. She'd asked the blonde man for some training tips at some point which had brought her to her current predicament, namely after the man had grinned and begun hers and Luke's, because the boy was pretty competitive to everyone's surprise, body improvement training. The satyr had to admit it was a good idea, especially since the man was obviously an experienced martial artist from what he'd seen of him throughout the journey. The man's son was no slouch either, even as he trudged behind the group with a contemplative expression. Heck, if Grover hadn't confirmed for himself that the two were mortal, even if they did feel strangely nature-wise, he might have classified them as a demigod and a legacy for some of their feats. You can't blame her, Thals. She's got the big man wrapped around her finger. Speaking of the other teenage demigod, the boy huffed with a smirk, even as he carried his own bag. His statement did make the man pause in his place as his face became devoid of emotion. What the satyr saw and felt next only reinforced his belief the man was abnormal. Before Grover could react, he saw the man seemingly throw Annabeth into the air again, evidenced by the girl's scream of surprise. It wasn't even a second before the satyr felt something get between his legs and force his thighs apart, while prompting him to reflexively hold onto the nearest object, which happened to be a full head of blonde hair. He didn't have time to scream before he felt the man move at unnatural speeds before the two teenage demigods and hook an arm under each of their buttocks, lifting them in the air abruptly and making them flail around in shock. They finally brought their arms and grabbed onto the satyr's shoulders to steady themselves, promoting the goat-legged boy to grip his captor's hair more forcefully. Before he could ask what happened, he was once again interrupted by the very familiar scream of Annabeth. The girl fell down from her brief trip to the sky and landed squarely on the satyr's own shoulders. All in all, Naruto now carried a demigod on each arm and a satyr on his shoulder who, at the same time, also carried young demigods on his own shoulders. The whole thing took seconds. The four riders' cries of alarms came later. What, Ash? What the? Uea! That was scary! Baeya! In response to their cries, the man only laughed heartily while walking with little trouble. Well, if you all wanted a ride, you should have said so. I'm plenty strong to carry you all. Bahaha! The man laughed out loud, even resuming his earlier skip in his step despite the noticeable extra weight he had. Why, Zetsu, do you want an boil? I could put you under, goat boy. Naruto asked his son while Grover himself bleated in protest. What even is this man? He thought in surprise, just as the whole group devolved into a series of screams and insults. Let us down, Mr. Whiskers! Talia screamed as small electric shocks began emitting from her body, unwittingly electrocuting Grover, who began bleeding again in shock. Even though the electricity wasn't painful, it still felt uncomfortable. Come on, man! This is embarrassing, Luke complained and kicked at the blonde man's side to force him to let go. To no avail, however, as the boy. Wee sweet little Annabeth was having the time of her life as she spread her arms and imitated an airplane. This is how the best father ever rolls, kiddos. Bahahaha. The man laughed, heedless of their protests, and adjusted his so as to not smush the three riding on him together. He walked forward with a grin, whistling a jaunty tune that accompanied his charge's complaints and further irritated them. Meanwhile, with Zetsu, the younger Uzumaki, in his disguised form, walked little ways behind the rest of the travelers. He had been thankful for his pop's distraction. It kept the man from interfering with his current business. Mainly, an alert by one of his clones. And that's pretty much what happened. A voice eerily similar to Zetsu's own spoke within his mind. I see, so the bratty goddess is getting suspicious. Thanks for the info, Z534. Continue your mission, the original Zetsu answered his clone. Asa. Original, said clone, sent the equivalent to a mental salute, before cutting the connection with his creator. Said Zetsu was left to stew in his own thoughts, his visage not betraying the troubled state his mind was in. God damn it, Pops, I knew I should have prevented you from making these graves. Now our cover is jeopardized, the younger Uzumaki thought angrily to himself as he racked his brain for an answer to this new development. Before he could start planning another counterespionage mission, though a new but familiar voice echoed through his mind. Is this a bad time? Hestia's soothing voice echoed through his mind, instantly relaxing the Uzumaki. Huh? Big I mean Hestia? No, nothing big's going on. What do you want? Zetsu internally cursed himself for letting the nickname slip again, before attempting to save face. Well, Zetsu instantly recalled his first discussion with his goddess, and how similarly nervous his own clone had acted. He feared the worst. Please tell me it's nothing bad, the younger immortal almost begged for the sake of his own peace of mind. There's the deity was interrupted by a new intruder to the conversation. Oh my! Is this the Zetsu boy you talked about? And he's calling you big sis? Oh, that is so precious. A more mature and melodious voice resounded. This understandably alarmed the Uzumaki lad. Huh? What? Hestia. Is my head a frickin' public park now? You inviting strangers? He caught himself from swearing when he felt not one, but two mental images of a disapproving frown and a bar of soap. Curse his clones and their shared memories. He could still feel the taste of that surfactant abomination on his tongue. Well, I wouldn't say she's a Hestia attempted to calm down the irritated spy but was once again cut off. I'm no stranger, little one. The stranger attempted to introduce herself before Zetsu blew a gasket. Don't call me little, he mentally yelled, his disguised face on the outside even reddening in embarrassment and anger. Mom, please. Zetsu's sensitive about his height, the goddess pleaded. I am not. Wait. And Moem? Said young man was startled by the revelation. Hestia's mother? Mother of the Olympians? Mother Rhea? Titan Queen Rhea? That Rhea? Ahem, if I may interject as if to confirm his inquiries, said Titanus spoke up. While I would enjoy continuing this conversation, I believe meeting you and your father would be a sage decision? The question in itself almost caused the young man to trip over his own 2 feet. Something his father did not notice since he was still quarreling with the other children sitting on his shoulders. And the pun? That made him freeze in place and rang alarms in his head. Mom! Don't start! Hestia admonished her mother swiftly. Ho. The eldest immortal did not seem to care, giggling in a manner that raised alarms in Zetsu's head. The way they spoke. The parallels. No way. No fucking way was his luck that shitty. His survival instincts went into high gear, eliciting the most appropriate response he could give. No, the word was uttered with the conviction of a haunted veteran being asked to return to his service. His answer didn't seem to deter the Titanus, who once again gave a tinkling laugh, and sent the equivalent of a dismissive gesture through the mental link. Oh, come on now, sweetie dash. Nuh, and don't call me that. What's wrong? Should I call you Pumpkin then? Don't you dare dash. Pumpkin it is then. You dash, Zetsu mentally shouted as he lost his temper, which he showed outwardly by gritting his teeth. It was like dealing with a female version of his pops. Again, what were the odds of that happening if not for his own bad luck? The Uzumaki silently swore to enact vengeance on the 7 lucky gods when the pair of tourists eventually returned to Nippon. He just knew they had something to do with this, and would be dealing with them accordingly. Mom, can you not? The goddess of the hearth complained exasperatedly. Ho. Let Mama have her fun, baby girl. In any case, Pumpkin dash. It's Zetsu. 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 Yes, as I was saying, I would love to get to know both of you and your father. Think about it, you're trying to avoid beef with my babies, no? Why not have me vouch for you? That is, of course, if you are good people and won't be a threat to my family. Ria spoke, finally serious and explaining her offer. As much as he hated it, it made sense. They'll eventually be found out, especially now that the bratty goddess was on their tail, likely with others too. Their options were limited and Zetsu wasn't about to look at a gift horse in the mouth. So with a heavy heart, he sent a mental nod to the pair, eliciting a noise of approval from the mother and discussed the potential meeting in further detail soon, before she disconnected from the link. Sorry about her. I know she can be a handful, but Hestia began, attempting to explain her mother's behavior, but Zetsu cut her off. I know. I'm sorry too, he said sympathetically before cutting the link. Zetsu Gaiden, The Hunt, Quest for Pan Part 1. Somewhere in Florida. Deep in the marshes, two small figures were waddling in the shallow water and could be heard arguing loudly. I told you to check the woods to the west. Why do you have to come here? One figure, a small imp-like creature, complained to the other. I was bored, okay. Besides, don't act like the original just cause you're a lower number. The other one, eerily similar, being snapped back. I might not be the original, but I was born first. You know how we roll Z2311. Like I care Z2309. I've been alone for days and you know we can't talk to humans. Then divide yourself. You got the chakra. But not the biomass. Moron. The younger Zetsu screamed at his senior while poking his small chest. Who are you calling a moron? Dumbass? The older Zetsu slapped the finger and pushed his junior away. Who are you calling a dumbass? Ugly. The junior shoved his senior back, sending the clone stumbling back. We got the same face, stupid, but I guess you must be one of the defective ones. The older Zetsu angrily retorted and ran to meet his fellow clone with a fist raised. Why you? Before the two could come to blows, the water in front of them abruptly exploded as a massive 15-foot alligator emerged, jaws open wide, and intent on gobbling the two smaller creatures up. The two Zetsus briefly looked at each other, then at the approaching predator. 2 minutes later. Munch. Stop hogging all the meat, I need it more than you do, the younger Zetsu complained to his senior, who munched on one of their victim's legs. It was an almost comical sight to the outside observer, for 2 3-foot-tall gremlins were dragging a massive beast 5 times their size, more specifically the largest one of its kind, 1. It would have been funnier had the two not displayed horrific table manners by simply tearing off the gator's flesh, hard scales included, from its body with sharp claws, and munched on it casually. Yeah, so anyway, did ya find a lead? The senior ignored the complaint and got down to business. Munch. No. Not really, it's like say 1025 said, a bunch of pools of natural energy are all over the country, but they keep popping up and out from various locations, the junior said plainly, shrugging his shoulder as he went on. Any pattern for 'em? The older clone asked. Say 342 through 50 are working on it, the younger clone answered. Munch. Ha. We need to find that guy Z2311 whined. Yeah, nodded Z2309 his head. This stuff's good, wanna hunt more of 'em? Took the words right out of my mouth. Chapter 14, Filler, Classy Dorks. Dobe. What do ya want, bastard? What's this I hear about you leaving? Well, are you going to say something? What do you want me to say? Something like the reason you're being a moron. You got their respect. Your dream is almost in hand. So why throw it away now? I never said I was throwing it away, it's just. This war made me realize. I still think like a kid sometimes. I've never really seen the world and just understood how it all works. Maybe in a few years, I can come back and claim the hat. I told Kakashi-sensei to warm me the seat by then. Besides, I'm still young, you know? No way am I gonna spend my youth in a cramped little office signing papers. Bahaha. Only you, Naruto. I heard about Hinata. Yeah, don't get me wrong, she's a nice gal, I just don't feel ready to settle down yet. Maybe after I come back. Don't say it. I already told her to move on. I don't want her holding out hope like that. Ha, and you call me a bastard. Shut up, Sasuke. A conversation between soul brothers. A large male clothing store, near Washington State Park, New York, 27th of September, 2000. Amidst the hustle and bustle of the Big Apple, an unusual commotion coming from a small corner shop attracted the attention of passers-by. None of them stopped for long, having been used to strange sights in the city and thus, putting it aside in favor of their more pressing priorities. Chad, a young part-timer manning the store, however, wished nothing more than to be in these busy people's shoes. At least then, he wouldn't have to witness and later on clean up, lest his boss gets on his case, the veritable chaos occurring in his establishment. The other workers had quickly taken their own customers aside and left the young man with the current problem to deal with alone. A short blond boy, a tall man who shared a similar shade of hair, had entered the shop, greeting him pleasantly, in the man's case, before simply bulldozing their way through his stock. Chad had seen things in his time here. He'd witnessed the depths of human depravity on Black Friday last year, had to play riot police against angry housewives whenever the manager decided to have a limited-time sale, started praying again when mothers started bringing their toddlers and forced them into dresses. He even stopped a shoplifter before. Basically, Chad believed he'd handled all this business could throw at him. He never expected it to be literal, however, as he was dogpiled with about half of the store's inventory. The troublesome duo had initially dragged him, with them asking all sorts of questions on high-class male clothing, questions that he answered to the best of his ability. Both his charges had been in the store for a couple of hours now, going through shirts, ties, and pants at a faster pace than most teenagers the young man had seen. He'd have long since kicked them out had it not been for his boss's insistence on treating the customer like royalty, and the fact the blond man had assured him they'd compensate him for the damage. From what little he could gather from the conversation, the two big clients, or at least he hoped they'd be big, had an appointment, or a reservation with some hotshot. They were clearly tourists, as the rest of the conversation had been in a foreign language, something related to Chinese or some other Asian language if the man had to guess. The rest was lost to him as a pair of designer moccasin shoes impacted his forehead with great force and put him out for the count. Several more articles of clothing were thrown atop the now unconscious man as the pair of clients continued arguing with no regard to their surroundings. Humph! The boy struggled as his father forced him into a moss green cardigan to fit over his yellow dress shirt. Stay still, boyo. Naruto, clad in a simple orange shirt and cargo shorts, fretted over his son as he forced his head through the fabric. Pops! Come on, this is stupid! We got tons of outfits back home. The younger Uzumaki complained. He had taken the disguise he used initially when they first came to the US, that of a young child. I know, but it's all too old-fashioned and not Western. Heck, my most modern fancy suit is from the Meishu period, and all you got is a few yukatas to hide your tatas. Now stay still. The whiskered man grinned cheekily. But Zetsu protested again. I need your butt in these pants, boy. The father interrupted him, his large grin never leaving his face, even as his son visibly groaned at him, but complied with his father's request. You got us invited to a dinner with probably one of the most influential people in this pantheon, so we gotta look our best, and I want to show off my handsome boy. The sage continued, as he adjusted the cuffs. After Zetsu's telepathic discussion with Hestia and Rhea, they had agreed to meet at the Titan's own residence for dinner and introduction. The duo had thus decided to usher the group to New York, where both had then sneakily left the young demigods with a couple of clones while the originals went clothes shopping. Sure, the sage could just conjure up the clothes with his creation of all things ability, but where was the fun with that? Plus, both knew squat about what was and wasn't fashionable. That said, Naruto had chosen a shop near the ex-Titan Queen's address and decided he and his son needed a makeover, much to the staff's displeasure. The man knew they were being a bother, so resolved to leave the workers with tips bigger than their respective salaries for the trouble the father and son duo caused. But looking at his child now, the sage knew it was all worth it. A pair of small brown khaki pants complemented the moss green cardigan and white shirt the younger Uzumaki wore for a top. The outfit was topped with a pair of Italian black leather shoes, all of it of a chic brand. And yet, it was still somehow lacking. The man thought while looking around the mess he had inadvertently caused in his search for the perfect outfit. He needed one last thing to really top off the cute look. A necklace? Not good. A tie? Nah, too formal. His eyes landed on a black bow tie before he snatched it off the ground. Crouching down in front of Zetsu, Naruto tied the item around his neck before covering his eyes and turning the boy around to face a mirror. Alright, Naruto looked around for a moment before looking at his son again, and smiling changed back, boyo. Zetsu sighed but obeyed. His skin turned an inky black, his yellow hair became the same shade of green as the cardigan, small horns grew atop his head, his nose, lips, and ears vanished while his mouth elongated and teeth sharpened. Looking at his boy's shaggy hair, Naruto frowned before a wooden comb grew out of his palm and he passed it through the green locks, pushing them down and to the side a bit. He'll of course do a better job later with an actual comb, but this. Naruto smiled before uncovering his son's eyes, revealing the yellow dot-like eyes the boy sported. Tadea, the man sang before making jazz hands, showing the boy his work. Zetsu hated every moment of this torture that his pops had seen fit to put him through. The man saw an opportunity and, much like a fox, pounced on it. What with the arrangement they made with Rhea and Hestia, and thus the need to, as proper decorum dictates, dress to impress, the sage had seen fit to force his son into snazzy child-sized outfits, and the occasional bunny suit. They'd been at it for a couple of hours. It was hell. Zetsu knew it had something to do with the scrapbook his pops was so obsessed with filling up. He swore on his uncle's tails to destroy the damn thing if he ever got his hands on it. First impressions are a huge thing in these kinds of formal meetings. You gotta show class, you know? His father said as Zetsu looked at the latest ensemble the man put him in, and blinked at the sight. There was only one sensible response to this. I look like a dork. Aha! I think you mean you look like a classy dork. The man rebuked him with a waving finger, as his grin, if possible, grew bigger. Pops. Trust me, Zetsu. I've been to these sort of meetings. You gotta take the diplomatic route, make sure they know who you are but also put them at ease. So you have to look your best while also not coming off as a pompous prick. It's that small gray area between simple and grandiose. You get me? I want to give myself a wedge at the younger Immortal deadpanned as he looked at himself in the mirror. I need to make sure no one back home sees me in this or dash. His thoughts were interrupted by a horrifying sound that spelled his doom. Click. Bahaha. That's a nice one for the scrapbook. The man guffawed like a donkey, his trusty Polaroid camera in hand. Pops. Come on. Zetsu immediately lunged at his father, aiming for the picture in his hand as the man sealed the camera into his palm, and held his son back with that same hand, the other continuously shaking the printed picture. As Zetsu fought in vain with his father, even shifting his shape to coil around the man's limbs, Naruto laughed in amusement, and proceeded to roughhouse with his dear child. Meanwhile, the poor worker was left unconscious in a pile of clothes. Just so you know, I'm proud of you. Naruto's grin was replaced with a genuine smile, as he lowered a hand on his sulking son's head, ruffling his green hair affectionately. Huh! Zetsu looked up from the ground, still in his new clothes and brooding about his potentially ruined reputations. Especially with his family. Then again, his younger sisters and aunts already treated him as a plush toy, so that would just increase the intensity of their coddling. You managed to extend a hand in friendship, and take the first steps towards us potentially avoiding any conflict with the Greeks. Heck, you're the reason we stayed undercover for so long. You did good, my boy, real good. The blonde patted the green-haired Uzumaki on the head. Naruto was a proud papa. His son never ceased to amaze him. From being a jutsu-creating genius to his phenomenal skills in stealth and infiltration, Zetsu was the ideal shinobi, and part of the sage wished his old comrades would have seen him, if only to, as all dads like to, flex his superior parenting and skills on them. And now? Naruto could safely add diplomacy to the list of skills his son was acquiring. That was a big step from the formerly cynical and pessimistic person he used to be. If nothing else, Zetsu was proof Naruto wasn't a bad dad. Despite growing up an orphan and a social outcast, getting drafted into a war against seemingly countless enemies, and even witnessing his entire world ending, the man was able to safely put all that behind him when it came to raising his child. He wasn't like his own father. While Minato Namikaze was a great leader and even had good intentions in the end, he was far from a stellar parent. Naruto had long since forgiven his dad for burdening him with a hard life, but he would never forget about the mistakes he made, and the importance of not replicating them. He wanted Zetsu to enjoy life above all else, and live happily even as an immortal. To that end, he had resolved to shoulder as much weight as he needed to do so to ensure his children had a life they could spend without regrets. Like any parent, nothing pleased him more than to see his kid growing up and realizing their potential. The sage still remembered how cold his son acted in his earlier years. The kid was hauntingly similar to the original Zetsu, what with his almost robotic attitude, his Yandere-like loyalty, his ruthlessness to his enemies, and especially his apathy that used to extend to his allies. It had initially worried the father, seeing his dear boy acting so similarly to an old and hated foe. But as the years went by and their family grew, the younger Uzumaki began to mellow out, and even though he kept some of his old mannerisms, as he had shown even recently, he became more accepting and more open to others, especially his own father, whom he even started to defy. His boy, originally born with a mindset Naruto abhorred, that of being a tool to others, had grown into his own person. He'd become independent, and even capable of making his own big decisions. Sure, some were still rash due to Zetsu's own lack of tact. The man could still not get over the fact his son infiltrated the Greeks' stronghold by sticking to a goddess's sandal. It was amazing, hilarious, and terrifying. But all in all, Naruto was feeling a lot of fatherly pride right now. Said feeling was shattered as he felt a pair of sandals conk him on the head. "What the hell, boyo?" the man said, annoyed. "Pops! Listen to me already!" Zetsu yelled at him, a leather boot in hand, revealing he's been trying to get his attention for a few minutes now, even going so far as to tug the man's shorts down to his knees. "Huh!" The man adjusted his shorts, seemingly unbothered by flashing his boxers in a public place. "What? What is it, Zetsu? You say something?" The blonde chose to respond in a fitting manner to his son's actions. Zetsu glared at the man. "I was asking," the younger Uzumaki said, annoyed. "What about you?" "What about what?" Naruto titled his head in confusion. "If I dress like a geek, you're dressing like one too. For God's sake, Pops. You're still in Crocs. You look like a beach bum, and you don't get me started on the ramen print boxers." The younger Uzumaki gestured to the man's attire wildly. Facing this onslaught of criticism, Naruto looked down at himself and came to a similar realization. "I'll poop." About an hour later, Zetsu, now clad in a pair of shorts and nothing else, sat facing the curtains of the shop's dressing room. He'd seen his father come out in various outfits and combinations and proceeded to sadistically shoot down and criticize every single one of them. Yes, he was petty, and yes, his pops completely deserved it. But it was also necessary. His pop's fashion sense was, as his aunts Matatabi and Koko would put it, There was no other way to describe it. The man was obsessed with three things: orange, ramen, and humor. So it made sense why his appearance usually fell into one or more of these categories, such as the initial outfit he came to the US in. But even his father knew how important this meeting was, so it wasn't a surprise to Zetsu when he'd agreed without much protest to play dress-up. That, and Zetsu had also threatened to tell Amaterasu their father put Shinto-Greek relations in jeopardy with his antics. Needless to say, the threat of his demands darling ray of sunshine getting upset with him had him looking for the fanciest and classiest suit the store had to offer with gusto. Zetsu debated on whether he should have his pops simply conjure a suit, since he now had an idea of what to look like. Nah. Let him squirm a bit more. Huey, the lad inwardly cackled. Am I interrupting something? a female voice echoed in his mind. Gah! The green-haired Uzumaki jolted in surprise. Huh! Boyo. You okay? The curtains of the dressing room parted briefly for Naruto to peek through. It's nothing, Pops. Now get back to changing. I wanna see you looking like a penguin. Zetsu laughed a bit forcefully, making his father groan and retreat back inside. Seeing the coast was clear, the shorter Uzumaki addressed the sudden visitor Big Air Hestia. He caught himself. What do you need? Also, can you stop popping up like that? Give me a warning first. Said Goddess audibly giggled in response. Sorry Zetsu, I simply wanted to check in on you too. Are you in New York now? Yeah, we're like 2 blocks away from the address you gave us. Pops wanted to get some new clothes because the hundreds of outfits we had back home clearly weren't enough, the Uzumaki thought back sarcastically. Yofufu, I take it you're not having fun? Zetsu could practically feel her smirking through the link. I am now. But that's only after hours of torture to end up looking like a nerd. He attempted to convey his grouchiness through the mental link, and was rewarded with the feeling of a shoulder pat. I'm sure it wasn't that bad, and that you look great. Hestia tried to placate him. You don't know what I mean, he growled to himself, only to feel the goddess uncharacteristically roll her eyes. Oh, trust me, I do. The greenette felt the goddess of family cut the link after that cryptic answer, leaving him wondering about what she meant. A feeling of dread crawled up his back, making him shiver just as his father emerged from the dressing room. Ria's penthouse, some time later. Hestia, while optimistic, was having her patience tested in a similar way to the Uzumaki lad. As she sat in a gorgeous-looking toga, one designed by Aphrodite herself to look as if it was made of flowing flames in a beautiful mix of dark orange and red. Hestia had even managed to convince the love goddess to keep the design conservative, much to said fashionista's chagrin. Unlike their 2 guests, both Greek immortals had a much easier time picking out their clothes. Seeing as both had much more experience in professional or high-class settings, all Hestia had to do was summon that one dress she used for such occasions. She didn't really care for extravagances like her sisters or some of the more feminine goddesses, even if Aphrodite always badgered her to accept her new designs, some of which revealed more skin than the eldest Olympian was comfortable showing. The goddess sat on a plush chair in the hallway leading to one of her mother's walk-in closets, and tapped her heel-clad feet on the ground as the ex-Titan Queen was continued rummaging through the bric-a-brac in the large room. Oh, Tia! How about this one? Ria held up an item from the door. It's nice, Mom, was the daughter's curt reply. But don't you think it's too flaunty? I don't want to come off as a pompous woman, the mother's voice echoed from the closet, showing some worry. Mom, trust me, it's nice, Hestia insisted as she rubbed the bridge of her nose. But the others were too thin, the Titaness replied. Mom, I doubt Mr. Naruto and Zetsu are going to care much about the cutlery or the color of the plates. They'll mostly be focused on the food, the goddess said firmly. She had been watching her mother rummage through her extensive collection of plates, bowls, and accessories for an hour now. She heard her mother hum in thought, before letting out an ah, and pushing some of the bigger boxes aside with a flick of her wrist to reveal what she needed. When Ria came out, Hestia raised an eyebrow in surprise. I don't know about that collection, the others were fine, but that one's a bit bizarre, she said hesitantly. Ho. I'm sure, her mother assured her as she came out with a larger but notably dustier box than the rest. Her mother was dressed just as well, if not better than the goddess, but that was partly because the woman could throw on literally anything and make it look amazing. One of her domains as a Titaness was beauty after all. The more family-friendly Immortal did, however, have to steer her mother away from her more revealing outfits for this one occasion. No offense to her dear parent, but the Titaness did not understand how much attention she tended to attract from men in general, let alone fellow immortals. Any potential suitors usually kept their distance because Ria's children, her included, drove them off. Yes, she was a mama's girl. Her siblings thought no different either, since they tended to let their mother coddle them without shame. That being said, Ria still looked breathtaking as ever in a custom white empire gown dress, having been adjusted to fit her larger size. The dress seemed to take some inspiration from the more frilly styles of the first half of the 20th century, but was also adapted to not look out of place in a modern setting. It stretched down to her sandal-clad feet. Unlike her daughter, Ria found no use in high heels, and was topped off with a front knot at the waist that seemed to only emphasize her curves while the outfit still left much to the imagination. Both immortals had favored very little makeup aside from Ria applying some lipstick, and their hair was let down in both cases, letting their respective chestnut brown and ebony black curls cascade down their backs. As for accessories, only the Titaness opted to wear a pair of emerald earrings that matched her eyes and made them pop. All in all, both ladies were ready to receive. Ding-dum. And just in time, too. Ria hurriedly moved to the large dining room where a beautifully crafted mahogany table sat. She took the box of cutlery in one hand and twirled her other hand, wordlessly making the box's contents set themselves perfectly on the table, while the box itself was returned to the closet. Checking on the food she prepared and being satisfied by the smell and taste, she speed-walked back to the front door where her daughter stood waiting for her. Kamianing the Titaness sang as she came up to the entrance. With a swift swing, the door came open and Ria's eyebrows raised in surprise. "Oh, hello," she mused appreciatively. "With the Uzumakis, a few minutes earlier." "Woo, that is one fancy hotel." Naruto whistled as he faced the large skyscraper where their host for the night awaited them. "Seeing who Hestia's mom is, I guess that's a given," Zetsu spoke up from next to him, clad in his disguise for the moment. He briefly sensed a large energy signature enveloping the structure, figuring out it was probably a barrier of some sort akin to a privacy seal. It seemed to absorb whatever noise came from both sides of it, and the Uzumaki even noticed people deliberately avoiding the building, as if it wasn't there in the first place. While only a few ever entered the front doors. He was sure his father felt it as well. "And I guess, though I feel like our gift is a little underwhelming," the elder blonde pulled on a sack he had slung over his shoulder. "It's rare enough to be good for a first meeting," the younger blonde said with a shrug as he looked up to the man. The whiskered blonde had ended up choosing a black three-piece suit, and had altered it slightly to fit some orange accents to the outer lining of the jacket while opting for an orange bow tie. He had joked about wearing a top hat and monocle as well, but Zetsu, not knowing whether his father was serious or not, had almost started a fight out of exasperation. Thankful his father had gone with a relatively normal choice, the younger Uzumaki walked in front of the man and entered the building. Immediately, both felt a shift in the air, noting the overwhelming energy that felt tangible in the air. The lobby itself was gigantic, almost the size of a ballroom, with various priceless decorations, Greek statues, and other pieces of art littering it, all under a giant crystal chandelier. Another curious observation was the busy staff on the ground floor, who seemed to be an assortment of different creatures, mostly nature spirits, satyrs, and the few mortals who either had a distinct signature, demigods, or lacked one, probably clear-sighted. Zetsu chose to keep his disguise for now. Odds are his appearance would alarm even these folks. All Naruto could do was whistle again while his son looked around curiously before his eyes landed on the elevator. Tugging his father in its direction, the golden doors opened and a satyr wearing a bellboy's attire greeted them. "Floor?" the goat man asked in a voice that conveyed how utterly bored he was. "Top floor, please," was Naruto's reply, making the man straighten up in surprise at the answer and put on a too large smile as his demeanor did a 180. "Of course, good sirs. Please allow me," the satyr said with a sugary sweet tone and motioned to carry the sack on the blonde's shoulder. "Nah thanks, just get us up please," the man replied with an amused smile as the bellboy obediently pressed a button. It didn't take long to reach the penthouse floor, but even then, Naruto had taken to humming the elevator music before Zetsu lightly hit him on the stomach to shut him up. The man snickered at his son's annoyance, knowing he was still bummed about his outfit. And the dopey haircut. Heh. Naruto whistled a third time as the doors opened to reveal the top floor's hallway, furnished with a selection of Persian carpets and porcelain busts every few feet. "Can you stop doing that every 2 minutes? We haven't even gotten to the room yet," Setsu complained as he came trudging out of the elevator. "I dunno how else to show my amazement. This is some fancy stuff, reminds me of Susanoo's crib whenever I dropped in, except there are fewer statues of himself. At least we know the lady doesn't have that big an ego." Bahaha. Naruto emerged behind his son, leaving behind a confused satyr as the elevator doors closed. I guess, the younger sage reluctantly admitted. His relationship with the two brothers of Amaterasu was bordering on hostile, seeing as Susanoo and Tsukuyami never outgrew their jealousy of their sister, and viewed the Uzumaki family as unwanted intruders due to their not godly nature. Oh, I can't wait to see Hestia-chan again. I got a fatherly head pat with her name on it. The blonde flexed his free hand and cracked its fingers in anticipation. Poops! Can you behave? Zetsu hissed. You're telling me to behave? Look at you dragging your feet like it'll make you taller. Bahahaha. The man didn't seem to care and smacked the boy on his back. Come on. Please don't do this here. The son groaned. Then stand up straight, boyo. This ain't the gallows. We gotta look our best, Naruto finally said with some measure of seriousness just as they got to the door. Standing up straight and adjusting his bow tie, Naruto raised his free hand and rang the doorbell. Ding-dum. He suddenly felt a bit nervous. It was as if he just now realized how important that meeting was to the future of their stay, and how high the stakes were. As a bead of sweat formed on his brow and he continued to wait a few minutes in silence, he hesitantly raised his fingers to ring the bell again, only to hear a muffled coming from behind the door. Not a few seconds later, the door swung open and Naruto found himself staring eye-level at the biggest bosom he had ever seen in his 12 millennia of life. Briefly, he pondered on the fact this woman somehow beat Tsunade Senju in the chess department, before his brain caught up with him, and he raised his eyes quickly. His sun-like eyes finally met with a pair of emerald green eyes. Whoa mama was the only thought that came to him. Chapter 15, Sage Meets Queen, the Punpocalypse. I could never forget the day I met my esteemed teacher, the only man to ever defeat me. I was but a young lad then, growing up in a small village of Banshu with naught but my sister and our father to keep us company. My father was very adept at martial arts, a master of the sword and of the jutty. Couple that with the noble deeds of my grandfather, and it ignited a desire for greatness in me even at a young age. With my first few duels, all of them victories, I grew confident in my own strength. By the age of 16, I had left my village in search of stronger opponents, leaving my possessions with my sister and brother-in-law. My travels would end up taking me to Kyoto, wherein I dueled and defeated several challengers. Tragedy struck me as one of the losers of the duel, having connections to the magistrate, framed me for a despicable crime, and dishonored me in the eyes of the people. I swiftly took his head for that. I stayed in Kyoto for a month, living life as I wished, answering the various attacks and challenges against me in kind, whether it was from petty criminals or the magistrate itself. I never lost. That is until I was approached by a startling yellow-haired individual with whisker-like markings on his cheeks who challenged me to a duel. Initially writing him off as a foreigner of the far west, I coldly dismissed him, assuming he was simply an arrogant peon with no knowledge of the blade. The man, on the other hand, had smiled and, unlike what his adult appearance would suggest, went for what might have been the most childish taunt I have ever heard. He called me a chicken. It was a pathetic insult, and while it should not have tempted me, I gave in to my anger and answered his challenge. I lost. Memoirs of Miyamoto Musashi, excerpt from the Book of Five Rings. Athena's Temple, Olympus, 27th of September, 2000. Artemis blinked in surprise upon entering her sister's home. For the first time in the last few days, the place was utterly devoid of any activity. After the huntress had initially given her wise sister the newest tidbit of information, Athena had decided that a complete revision of every single scrap of paper in her eastern section was mandatory. Now though, there were no flying books or handmaidens running errands in a hurry, and for the first time in millennia, a peculiar sound invaded the giant library. The sound of soft snoring. The goddess of the moon raised an eyebrow before walking deeper into the temple, intent on finding the central desk. As she turned the corner to look at her sister, she was shocked to find her usually dignified and regal sister asleep with her head in her arms. Her black hair, usually perfectly coiffed and tied in a braid, was let down and frizzled from obvious lack of care. The desk itself was overflowing with documents and papers while the few handmaidens her sister had in the temple slept around it on the ground. It seemed like they had taken the opportunity to rest when her sister crashed. Artemis would have punished them for slacking had it not been for the signs of overwork and creases visible on their faces. She sighed at the sight, not really knowing how else to react to the spectacle. Moving with a feathery light step, something natural given who she was able to get close to her sleeping sibling without making a sound. Tentatively, she raised a hand and put it on the older goddess' back. A bad decision in retrospect, since Artemis had to lean her head back immediately to avoid a golden spear, and jump back a few feet to avoid a second one. WH? Athena woke up with a snort and materialized another spear in hand, looking around frantically for any threat. When her eyes landed on Artemis, she visibly relaxed, dismissing the weapon in hand before looking at the goddess of the moon tiredly. Artemis merely raised an eyebrow at the wise goddess. Sorry, Athena said lowly before dropping her head back on her desk. Are you okay, sister? Artemis asked, already knowing the answer. MMF, the goddess of war mumbled unintelligibly. Artemis sighed and rubbed the bridge of her nose, before she gained a determined look, marched forward, and yanked her sister up by the back of her toga. Huh! Woo Artemis! Sister! Unhand me right now! The studious goddess sputtered as she struggled against the huntress' grip. Athena, enough is enough. I expected that clue I gave you to help you, but all I see you doing is tiring yourself out. Artemis avoided one of her siblings' hands and wrestled her out of the chair. But I was so close. I know it. Athena held onto the desk desperately. Did you find anything? The silver-eyed deity questioned with a raised eyebrow as her sister stopped her struggles momentarily. No, but the gray-eyed goddess attempted to justify herself before her little sister managed to drag her out in the direction of her temple's door, having taken advantage of her tired state. But nothing, we're going to the hearth, and I'm asking Aunt Hestia to make us something. You're taking a break, Athena? The younger immortal finally yelled back as she adjusted her hold to drag the goddess of strategy by the armpits. Okay. Just let me get more presentable at least. I can't let anyone see me like this. Athena finally agreed, seeing the wisdom in her sister's words. She had been working non-stop for a month now after all, and her work ethic had only intensified in the last week since her sister brought her a crucial clue on her target's identity. It had gotten to the point where she had pretty much commandeered her handmaidens into helping in the workload, while she burned herself out. Goddess of stamina, however, she was not. Good. Now let's move. I hope Aunt Hestia can make us some of her macadamia cookies. I could use some, Artemis said as she licked her lips, feeling herself drooling at the thought of her aunt's pastries. Ria's penthouse, same time. Hestia and Zetsu looked nervously at their respective parent. Both older immortals were silent and obviously sizing the other up. The tense silence lasted until Ria's green eyes broke away from Naruto and moved down to look at Zetsu. Oh my heavens! Was all the well-dressed Uzumaki boy heard before he felt a dainty but powerful pair of arms lift him off the ground. Before he could protest, the green-haired lad felt his head, and half his body, get enveloped by something soft and voluminous. He is so adorable! The Titaness squealed as she smushed Zetsu into her chest. That remark seemed to have sparked something in the blond man as a giant smile appeared on his face, his tension all but disappearing. I know, right? My boy's handsome as a button, he crowed excitedly. He had felt an aura of warmth around his fellow parent, one eerily similar to her daughter's, and it had put him instantly at ease. And you've had him dressed up like he's going to a Sunday school? Ho ho ho! The raven-haired immortal giggled into one of her hands before she stuck it out in greeting. I'm sure your son already told you, but I'm Ria, little Tia's mother, she smiled, heedless of said son's struggles. Hestia flushed from the side at the embarrassing nickname. MMMPH. Zetsu attempted to make his disapproval known. Naruto looked down at the offered hand in thought. What did Mata-chan say I should do in this case? All right. His eyes lit up as he remembered detail of his surrogate sister's etiquette lessons. The giant hellcat had always been the most social amongst the Bijou, his family. She'd taken an interest in mortal traditions, arts, and culture since the dawn of humanity. She'd regularly try and imprint the many values she'd learned on her siblings and followers. Dense as he was, some of her teachings did end up sticking. So, with a soft miss accompanied by a practiced and gentle movement, he took Ria's hand into his own and bowed, his lips merely brushing her knuckles before getting up and smiling at the woman. Ria was amused at the man's shift in character. She was also a little flattered at his gesture. A gentleman, hmm? She threw a quick knowing look at her daughter, who narrowed her eyes at her. The name's Naruto and Uzumaki, nice to meet you, Ria. And just like that, whatever sense of class he projected vanished, leaving behind a grinning, energetic man. An eccentric gentleman? Ho ho ho, she giggled internally before noticing her other guests frantically tapping her sides. Mom! Please! You'll suffocate him, Hestia spoke out and tapped the Titan's arm hurriedly. Bahaha! Don't worry, Hestia-chan. Zetsu's a tough nut even if he doesn't look like it. The father didn't seem to share the goddess' worry and waved it off. But then, he snapped his head in the goddess' direction and widened his eyes, as if he only now noticed her presence. Oh? Is he starstruck by my little girl's beauty? I knew my Tia could snare a man. Ria thought excitedly, content to watch the ensuing scene, even as her captive's struggles continued. Hestia Kaean. The blonde cooed with adoration and walked towards her with his hands opened up for a hug, something that had the goddess take a step back with a nervous look on her face. This made the Titan's eyes narrow. That was a bit forward, no. She did not want to make assumptions, but her daughter's reaction raised alarm bells in her head. She extended her senses and attempted to feel out his intentions. Ria was an empath. Unlike her daughter, though, she was an active one, meaning she required active concentration to read another immortal being's emotions. If for 1 second she sensed the man was about to do something unsightly to her daughter, pantheonic threat or not, she was going to make sure he backed off for good. A quick scan, however, alleviated her worries and made a grin bloom back on her face. Just as soon as she did so, so did the man reach Hestia, enveloping her in a tight hug despite her protests. Oh, you look so cute in that dress. Like a little flower I want to pick up and keep with me forever. The man was laughing and swinging the goddess from side to side. There was no shred of lust in him. The ex-Titan queen let out a sigh of relief. She then laughed audibly at her daughter's expression as the blonde continued hugging her, even as the man's son remained trapped in her bosom. Put me down, Mr. Naruto, or I swear to Olympus I'll start burning you, Hestia yelled out. MMMMPH Zetsu added his 2 cents from his fleshy prison. The two parents laughed. This dinner was going to be fun. Not so much for the kids. Olympus, Hall of the Gods, same time. The largest room in Olympus was the Hall of the Gods. It served as the throne room, the place where the gods have their summer and winter solstice meetings. It lacked a tangible ceiling, opting instead for a view of the clear sky above glittering with constellations. The thrones in question stood in AU and surrounded the object of Artemis and Athena's current objective, Hestia's hearth. To be more precise, the 2 virgin goddesses were looking for the 3rd maiden, their aunt, and probably their favorite family member. Hestia was Bestia, as Apollo and Hermes liked to say jokingly. The giant doors leading to the hall opened on their own, allowing the 2 deities to pass. Athena, now dressed more appropriately and have managed to fix her appearance with a bit of magic, quickly scanned the thrones. She agreed to take a break. She did not need any of her annoying siblings or that damn barnacle beard to show up and ruin her day any further. She was here to de-stress. That meant snuggling into one of the cushions by her aunt's hearth and possibly, maybe, hopefully getting to eat something she made. Apollo? What are you doing here? Artemis' voice snapped Athena out of her thoughts and soured her mood. Great, just great. MMF, huh? Lil sis. Come give your big bros some sugar. The god of the sun had been lounging around the hearth in a black AC/DC shirt and a pair of shorts, and munching on something, as evidenced by the crumbs littering his lower face and shirt. He swiftly got up and made to hug his sister. The goddess of the moon answered his request by showcasing her flexibility and planting her boot-clad foot on his face. Don't touch me, little brother! How many times do I have to tell you that I'm older? She snarled at him as he stumbled back from the unexpected hit. Ah. Sith. He whined. The huntress didn't seem to care about his suffering and instead marched up to him and held him up by his shirt, shaking him back and forth. You didn't answer my question, you pig-headed buffoon. Why are you here? She asked before stopping her shaking. And have you seen Aunt Hestia? She added, glaring at him. The god, looking like a more handsome version of a California frat boy, groaned at the rough treatment and tapped his sister's hand in surrender. The huntress complied with his request, dropping him back on the ground and tapping her foot impatiently. Well? She snapped as Athena stood at the side, nursing a growing headache. Relaxing today, he began, groaning all the while. And only, Hestia leave, he continued as Artemis' frown grew more pronounced. Enjoying the treats, he pointed at a tray filled with delicious ambrosia cookies left near the fire. And just like that, the goddess of the hunt became the goddess of gluttony and hurriedly stepped over her brother to get to said treats, plopping down next to it and taking a cookie to munch on with a pleasant hum. Athena slapped a hand to her forehead. Really, Apollo? Again with the haikus? She asked, visibly annoyed. The handsome god of the sun rose up from his position and spotted the goddess of wisdom. Hi Athena, how are you today? He said nervously, obviously picking up the vibe his oldest sister was emitting. The smartest being on Olympus' side again, noticing how she's done that a lot lately before gazing at her brother in a deadpan. Apollo, did Hestia leave a note behind or anything to indicate her location? She asked. The blonde god scratched his cheek and shrugged. She didn't say where she was going, but she was here like 3 hours ago, left these cookies and told me to only take a couple before whooshing away. I've been chilling here since then, he finished before he turned around to join his sister around the hearth. At her glare, however, he laughed sheepishly and opted for a seat on the opposite side of the hungry goddess. Athena sat down next to her sister and took one of the treats, settling herself into a cushion and sinking into it with a content sigh. She closed her eyes and let her mind rest. She had reread all the material she could possibly find on the East, and while she knew that Japan had a lot more books and documents she did not possess, it was Shinto territory, meaning it was off limits. For now, she'd have to relax, just like Artemis said. Just take a breather. Apollo's presence was unwelcome, but she honestly did not have the energy to rebuke him or chase him off. Even if he was stuck in that stupid haiku phase. Ever since he'd gone to Japan. Zeus' beard! She exclaimed, sitting up in alarm. Bah! Wha! Both siblings shouted out, spitting out the cookie they were eating in surprise. Apollo started coughing before he felt a grip not unlike that of an eagle's talon seize his shoulders. Opening his eyes, he was met with his sister's gray ones as she looked at him intensely. Before he could, nervously, ask what his scary older sister wanted, the goddess of war spoke. Apollo, I need you to answer me clearly, she said sternly. Why, yes? He pulled on his collar a bit. Sister, are you serious right now? The other virgin goddess called out from her position but was thoroughly ignored. How much of Japan have you seen? How much can you see? Can you do it without arousing any interpantheonic issues? The goddess barraged the blonde with questions. Ere Apollo started before he regained his composure. Well, I've seen Tokyo and some of its rural areas. I can't peer at it as I do here, but I can physically visit the main cities and tourist spots, and even then, I can feel myself being watched by some of the Shinto. I might have a bit more freedom there seeing as I drive the sun chariot, but I'm still restricted, he explained as best as he could. The black-haired goddess took all that information in, muttering to herself a bit, before she summoned a picture in her hand, one that Artemis took of the tombstones. I've got a job for you, she said with a positively sinister smile. Apollo shivered. Ria's penthouse, later. Hey Zetsu, look at what mine says. Lunch is on me, get it? Oh. Or that spoon. My life is pointless, genius. Bahaha Naruto guffawed as he sat at one end of the table, and gestured to his dinner plate and utensils which had various jokes etched on. Zetsu caught himself from slamming his head on the table, opting instead to paw at a bottle of hard liquor and pour from it into his cup. Hestia settled for sending him a pitying look and awkwardly sipping from her own cup. "Ho. I'm grateful you like it, Mr. Naruto," the green-eyed Titaness said with a laugh before taking a sip of her nectar-filled cup, choosing to ignore the children's actions. She smiled to herself. Looks like she made the right choice. Her joke set was one she had received as a gift from her sister decades ago, but never had many chances to use it. But seeing how Hestia described her guests, she took a gamble and was rewarded for it. "Are you kidding? I rarely ever meet someone that shares my sense of humor. You're one funny lady, Ria. And stop calling me mister, I ain't that much older than you." "Heh." The blonde man grinned at the Titaness before drinking some orange juice, having refused wine or alcohol under the excuse that it did nothing to him. Turns out she found a comedic compatriot. That sounded right. "Ho. You flatter me, sir." The Titaness held one of her cheeks as her ears colored a bit, before she perked up, going back to the subject of their ongoing conversation. So in the end, all you're doing here is some tourism? He had explained his entire story to her, and confirmed what Hestia said. Still, though, she had to poke around a bit. "No other reasons at all?" She waggled her eyebrows. "What?" Aphrodite wasn't the only one looking for gossip. Who knows? Maybe the man came looking for, what did her grandbabies call it again? A hookup? It sounded naughty. Naruto scratched his cheek in confusion. "Dunno what you mean, but that's really the only reason we came. Japan's been getting stuffy lately and my boy wanted to go somewhere. It was either the US or Europe and I haven't really seen the Americas in a long time." "You mean you've been here before?" the Titaness asked curiously. She had honestly thought the sage would have been confined to the East since his legend mostly originated from there. "Thousands of years ago, yeah. I mostly went through the South, met some of the folks living there and taught them some agriculture. Heh. I even got a daughter still living there, you know." Ria blinked in surprise. That was news to her. "You have a daughter? An immortal one at that?" she probed. "Yup, Quatsy's a sweetheart, if a bit too much of an adrenaline junkie, but I love my radiant serpent all the same." He laughed heartily. "Quetzal? Radiant serpent? Could it be Quetzalcoatl?" It was, to her knowledge, the sky god of the Aztecs. She didn't much like thinking of those folks because of how violent and fanatic they were, what with their love for sacrifices. Despite the taboo nature of her thoughts, she was grateful that particular pantheon had all but faded. But if one of their main deities was this man's progeny, it raised some questions. Ria used to be a queen herself. She was very familiar with interpantheonic politics. The fact the gallant sage of the East, a being who had terrified her own husband, had relationships with more than one pantheon was troubling. She shook her head to rid herself of these negative thoughts. None of that now. The man wasn't lying and she knew for sure he wasn't, having taken the precaution of activating her empathic abilities on him since the start of their discussion. "There was that one time where Quatsi tried pranking me." "Ha! That girl actually put a bowl of soup in the ground with a hidden rope around it." "Bahaha!" Ria snapped out of her thoughts, realizing that her guest had continued talking while she had, rudely, been daydreaming. The man luckily didn't seem to notice, having derailed the conversation into a series of tales involving him and his daughter. As amusing as exchanging embarrassing tales of her children with another parent would be, she still needed to make sure of one last thing. Deciding to shelve her worries, for now, she opted to change the subject. "Ahem, as interesting as that is, there is another matter I wish to discuss with you," she began with a small cough to get his attention. It worked as he visibly perked and smiled back at her, nodding for her to continue. As he did, great pressure fell onto the table. Ria interlocked her fingers in front of her face, while her hair cast a shadow over her eyes, making them glow ominously. The sage pursed his lips and tilted his head in confusion. "What are your intentions towards my little Tia?" she finally said, in all seriousness. That brought Hestia's attention away from the brief conversation she was having with Zetsu. The goddess flushed in embarrassment at her mother. I intend to give her the one thing she's been missing the most, he replied casually. Hestia's face might as well have caught on fire with how much heat it emitted. Zetsu, on the other hand, slammed his head on the table. How so? Have you perhaps found a flame in her? Ria probed, disengaging her fingers. A deafening silence stretched at the table as the man's face seemed to get a lot of definition. Zetsu's own forehead developed a layer of sweat, while a menacing aura filled the room. Nah, she's a bit too young for me, but she did light a spark in me, Naruto replied with a grin. And what might that be? I'm just burning to know the Titaness. Put both hands on the table and rose up, grinning competitively all the while. Anything for a few low enthusiasts. If you must know, I saw something I've only ever seen in a few people in my long life. The blonde got up into a similar position to the Titaness, before his eyes shifted to Hestia. The goddess narrowed her eyes. With a lightning-fast movement, Naruto's right hand blurred in her direction, palm open. His potential victim caught the hand with her own, applying an unnatural pressure on his wrist. Even then, he only smirked. Gotcha, he said with an evil-sounding chuckle, as a second copy of the man appeared behind the goddess. Before either Hestia or Ria could react, the clone palmed the top of the brunette's head. If you must know, Ria, I found in Hestia a target. His grin grew outright fierce to the point even the mother grew serious, assuming he was up to no good. Silence once again descended upon the group. Except for Zetsu, who for his part, reached for another bottle. A full-blown grin erupted on his face. To give all the hugs and head pats she can handle. What? Ria's face went through several shifts. From one conveying confusion to realization, relief, disappointment, and finally, acceptance. It seemed Hestia did charm the man, but as a child would to a parent. That explained why he wasn't attracted by her daughter despite the latter's beauty and amazing personality. He and Ria were in a way, birds of a feather. They were old enough that even elder gods seemed like children in comparison. Suddenly, Ria felt a great amount of relief well up in her. There really was nothing to worry about, the two guests didn't have any negative intentions. Well, in that case, some fun was in order. Well, that's nice to heat. I was worried for a second, she said, still in her standing position and resuming the little pun-off they began. I get you, we're both pyro and TS. I get worried about my kids too, can't have them be fueled around by random punks. The blonde matched her pace, bringing both hands back on the table and leaning closer to her. Oh? A challenge? You know, Naruto, I've rarely ever met someone with such a flirtatious talent like yours, but are you sure you can match me? She smirked and leaned forward herself. Right back at Cha. You better have brought ice water cause you're about to get burned. His face got closer to her as a competitive glint shined in his sun-like eyes. Who needs burns when I'm already on fire? Her voice gained an almost sultry nature as she met him in the middle of the table, their faces only a few inches apart. Both immortals continued their stare down, before both of their cheeks puffed up and they fell back in their chairs, laughing heartily. Bahahaha. This is the most fun I've had in a while. You're amazing, Ria. Ho. I couldn't agree more. You're a delight to have, Naruto. Both immortals continued laughing, both of their respective children settling for gazing at the spectacle in horror. After calming down, the four settled back in proper positions as Ria finally decided it was time to dine. With a snap of her fingers, light shined on the table and a literal feast appeared before everyone. The first thing to assault both Uzumaki's noses was the mouth-watering smell. A grand three-course meal stood before their eyes, from starters to desserts and hello, the sage thought with glee, as his eyes immediately zeroed in on a moderately large pot set to the side while his son focused on a covered tray. Ria and Hestia made him ramen. These gals were practically family now. I told Mom about your fancy for ramen and Zetsu's love for meat, so we decided on introducing you to our cuisine while adding something you're both familiar with. Hestia took the initiative and presented the food, first pointing to the starters. So we'll begin with the meze, consisting of some tzatziki with homemade pita bread. She gestured to a bowl filled with yogurt and pieces of vegetables, alongside some Caesar salad. She then pointed to the two main dishes. While we're not that familiar with Eastern cuisine, We tried our best to make the noodles as tasty as possible. She paused, looking at a drooling Zetsu as a smirk came onto her face, and for the little one, we went with a classic moussaka. His son not reacting to having his height pointed out was simply evidence of how good the food was. And for dessert we have the goddess began before Naruto raised a hand to stop her. Sorry to interrupt you, Hestia-chan, but I actually brought something for that. The man reached behind him and raised up the sack he brought. Ria was surprised but smiled pleasantly. Oh, you didn't have to do that, Naruto. Pap. You already made us dinner, this is the least I could do. He nodded to himself and then threw the Titanus a smirk. Besides, now that I know I have a fellow partner in puns, I'm sure you'll love it. He opened the bag and reached inside. The two Greek immortals were surprised to see the blonde deposit 4 fruits on the table. Their patterns were reminiscent of watermelons, but each was a different color and had some particularities. A blue melon with green stripes shaped like a regular watermelon, a white one with blue stripes about the same size as the first, a red one with brown stripes that was smaller than the others, and a brown one with black stripes, the last one being the largest. I once did an experiment that yielded some interesting results, he began explaining, seeing both ladies were paying him attention, while Zetsu was still drooling to the side. I've exposed fruits to different natures of chakra, or magic as I call it, to get me some neat results. He pointed at the fruits in order. Water, wind, fire and earth. No way. Ria immediately caught on to the man's thought process, while Hestia was simply amazed by the fruits. Yes way, my dear hilarious homie, I have gone above and beyond. Naruto raised his hands to the ceiling as he proclaimed his genius, much to Hestia's confusion and Ria's growing excitement. You've seen the watermelon, but does it not make sense for there to be a wind melon, fire melon, and earth melon? Together, pending FDA approval, they are. He paused for effect. Hestia finally realized the error she had committed by bringing this man to her mother. The Elemelans, both Naruto and Ria said in unison, before exploding in laughter. Ha ha! You did not just bring that joke to life. The Titanus held her side as she laughed in delight, foregoing any type of regality, and letting loose completely. Bahahaha! You better believe it, sister! The sage was just as happy as the ex-Titan queen. This was the start of something beautiful. Chapter 16: Dastardly Developments. A beautifully soothing melody resounded over the cries of different animals. Deep in a dense jungle, amongst the millions of unique species of bugs and animals, the sage found what must have been the most unique amongst them. Shulalalala, a snake clad in rainbow-colored feathers, swayed in rhythm to the song the man was playing. Clad in a makeshift cowl and loincloth made out of a jaguar's hide, with his muscular tattooed body on display, he moved his hands in a manner reminiscent of a maestro, manipulating the wind itself to create sound waves, giving birth to different notes in the process. At his side laid a wooden club with several embedded obsidian blades, a macuhuitl, and a small gift he had gotten from a mortal he'd saved and who had apparently mistaken him for a deity. He was a nice guy if a bit loopy. Bahaha! She's such a cutie! Look at how she's dancing, Zetsu! With his hands still miming, the man laughed out and looked at his son, who was nonchalantly lifting a nearby fallen tree to look at the insects under it with interest. The other Uzumaki cast a glance at the snake before returning to his earlier observations. I see it too, Pops. I think snakes tend to sway to music, he said. Aye up, the blonde said happily before raising a hand towards the serpent. The animal seemingly understood Naruto's intention and pressed its head up against his palm, hissing pleasurably. The man cooed at the sheer preciousness of the action before he looked back towards his son. Hey he Zetsu, he said teasingly, as the animal slithered up his hand to rub against his face. The greenette sighed. What? Let's keep it, the blonde declared happily with his hands in the air. Pops! Not again! Bahaha! Shulalalala. The sage meets the serpent. Miles off Nagasaki, Japan, 27th of September. Apollo was nervous. For good reason, too. Taking the form of a cherry-red Maserati, or the ultimate chick magnet as he liked to call it, the sun chariot was powered down, even as it flew in the Japanese airspace. Apollo shivered as a particularly cold breeze tickled his skin, before he inhaled the cool air, psyching himself up for his next ordeal. Getting through security. No, really. Much like mortal airports, there was an agreed-upon standard procedure when it came to visiting foreign pantheons. Similar to how Greek gods could not breach into one another's domain, the same logic applied to other pantheons, especially the Shinto, who were known for their reclusiveness. In the Japanese deity's case, any visiting foreign deity had to land on the island nation either in Ise in the Mie prefecture during the day, or Amaterasu's turf as the supernatural knew it, or the other option which Apollo dreaded, Nagasaki, aka Tsukuyami's stomping grounds, during the night. You know. There was a reason he almost always entered Japan during the day. He and Tsukuyami were far from being on friendly terms. The god was known as one of the three strongest in his pantheon, except for the Shinigami, and able to comfortably rival one of his uncles and thus, quite easily wipe the floor with him if the guy felt like it. A feeling he seemed to get almost every time Apollo made the mistake of coming at night time. One time I flirted with Amaterasu, and it's like I made his shit list permanently. The blonde lamented that particular rejection. He remembered Aphrodite had a field day over that tidbit, so much so that the love goddess had taken it as a challenge. She shot her shot, missed, and suddenly Apollo wasn't the only one in a sour mood. Anyway, here he was now, flying over the home turf of the one deity he did not want to piss off at the moment. Keeping his eyes peeled for any unusual sights and his senses open to any other signatures, Apollo lied in wait. No pressure. Seeing the city come into view, the deity began descending. Before he could advance any further, however, a small cloud materialized in front of him, something that had his reflexes screaming at him to avoid. The chariot abruptly swerved and missed the obstacle by a hair. Apollo grinned as he saw more clouds appear. Oh, so the man in the moon wanted to play? The god conjured a pair of aviators and pushed them up to his nose. Challenge accepted. He shifted gears before stepping on the gas pedal, and with a purr, the chariot accelerated and swiveled between the clouds with grace, making its way through the surprise obstacle course and over the city. Ha ha! Nice try, old man. But you'll have to try harder to catch my baby. The god guffawed once he saw the end of the line. Just a little more. Croc. Just as he finished his taunt, a giant hand that looked like it belonged to Typhon exploded out of the center of the city directly below him. Buildings flew through the air, explosions erupted as Nagasaki was bathed in fire, drowning the screams of countless innocents. Apollo's eyes widened at the sight of the catastrophe, but before he could scream out a response, he found himself turning sharply to the side to avoid a second hand aiming to swat him. What the Hades? The god screamed in shock just as a monster emerged from the destruction. God, the creature roared out, sending shockwaves through the air. He knew he hadn't made contact with a cloud or anything that could trigger Tsukuyami's traps, so this wasn't an illusion. A Godzilla-like cataclysmic creature just rose up and annihilated the entire city. But before he could properly react, the monster seemed to lock onto him before it lunged, jaw wide, towards him. Strangely enough, despite every fiber of his being commanding him to dodge, his body remained deathly still and refused to obey him. It was like in those mortal dreams where reaction time was infinitely slowed. Internally panicking for a moment, he had no choice but to face the monster as its building-sized teeth inched closer to his chariot. Before the titanic jaws clamped shut around him, Apollo used the last moments to curse out Athena for that stupid mission, just as his world dissolved into complete darkness. Everything around him bar his chariot, be it sight or sound, vanished. It took him mere seconds to understand he's been duped. Oh us. Come on! The sun god slammed his head into the steering wheel in frustration as he was left floating in his vehicle alone in an empty void. When did he get trapped? Then damn it! That was why he hated dealing with Tsukuyami. The god had a flavor for mental attacks and loved mind-fucking his targets with nightmarish illusions. The only thing needed was a trigger which he was sure he had avoided. Unless... Cold evening, no? A voice whispered by his ear. Eek. The god almost jumped out of the car in surprise and turned to see his tormentor. Sitting in the passenger seat with an infuriatingly smug smirk on his face was an equally handsome man with long silver hair pulled into a ponytail. With no facial hair to speak of, his facial features were soft, almost feminine, and highlighted by a pair of silver eyes that always creeped Apollo out with their eerie resemblance to his twins. He was dressed sharply in what the Greek could recall was a fancy kimono, the one priests usually wore to holy ceremonies. It only served to highlight how traditional some of the gods in that pantheon were. He'd never been to Takamagara, but he had no doubt from his previous meetings with the Shinto that it was probably modeled to look like the feudal era of Japan. "Heh, always nice to see you lose your marbles," Gaijin-chan, the silver-haired god, snickered at the blonde. "Oh yeah, there was also that stupid nickname." Apollo sighed to himself and once again slammed his head on the car horn. "Us damn it." Ria's penthouse, same time. Zetsu felt as if he was levitating. He had taken a single bite off his plate, choosing to begin with the main dish, since Miat, he thought with glee as he gazed at his favorite food. Gastronomy's true king of the hill. His one true love. His pops could go stew in his ramen, while he, Zetsu, food connoisseur, and world-class critic, basked in the delight offered by the manliest of foods. And he was proven right again. With his mouth as his witness. His tongue was dancing between his teeth, trying its hardest to cover every taste bud in the delicious combination of minced meat and vegetables. A perfect balance between the robustness of the sliced potatoes and the juiciness of the aubergines, the latter acting like sponges, soaking up the creamy bechamel sauce. He'd have to give his compliments to Hestia, who had bashfully admitted to preparing his meal, on her attention to detail, especially when it came to the eggplants. It would have been so easy to mess up and have them come out bitter, but whether by magic or sheer talent, he felt nothing but the sweet taste of the sauce while the meat countered it with a more salty and sour combination. All in all, a real mixer of flavors, yet not chaotic or crude. Just perfect. Zetsu closed his eyes in bliss and leaned back in his chair. Click. His eyes snapped open and a screech tore from his throat. "Pops!" He looked at his father only to find the man smirking at him without any camera in hand. "Oh! He's so happy!" The Titaness cooed from the side and Zetsu creaked his neck towards her, only to see, to his horror, a smaller, more advanced device than his dad's in her possession. "Make sure to send me a copy, Ria. He looked so precious." "Bahaha!" Naruto laughed while his fellow parent tittered in delight. Zetsu groaned in despair and sank down in his seat. He blinked when he saw his fork held up in front of him and turned to see Hestia looking at him with a demure but happy expression. "Thank you for the compliment, Zetsu. It's very appreciated. I'd be delighted if you had some more too," she said with a kind look in her eyes. The green-haired sage looked back at the fork and took it from the goddess' grasp, before muttering a faint thank you for the meal. Both looked at their parents, who were immersed in their own conversation, with Ria even gesturing to the pot of ramen she had made and inviting Naruto to taste it. "I'm sorry about Mom. I know she can be a bit overbearing," but the brunette began with a demure smile, but her fellow immortal cut her off. "Don't. I've been dealing with Pops for the past 7 millennia. It's nothing unfamiliar at this point," he said. "Oh," the goddess blinked at his answer, before noticing a key detail. "Zetsu? Did you say 7 millennia?" "Yeah? I mean, it's more like 6,844, but I might as well round up the value at this point. Big sis? Something wrong?" he asked with a tilt of the head. "It's just you're actually older than me," the goddess said with a wince. "Eh?" Zetsu went on red alert at this revelation. Had he been mistakenly calling her his senior? "By around 2,000 years, give or take a few decades, I believe," the goddess continued, unknowingly and ironically adding fuel to the fire. Zetsu looked at her with a blank expression, or as bland as he could convey with his features. His cheeks then flushed a green color. "How embarrassing!" "God damn it," he muttered. "Don't worry, it's an easy mistake to make amongst us immortals." The goddess tried to placate him only for the immortal to sigh. "It's just, you're so mature and motherly, I just instinctively did it, you know?" he said before his eyes widened and he clamped his hands over his mouth. He quickly looked at Hestia and glared at her. You heard nothing, the shorter immortal said sternly. The goddess simply raised an eyebrow at the older immortal. What? You mean that? Yeah, the verbal tick. I know about the verbal tick. I've been trying to get rid of the verbal tick for centuries. Pops wouldn't let me hear the end of it if he knew about it. He growled only for the deity to giggle at him. Fufu, I wouldn't truly see it as a bad thing. I think it's cute. No. I already get this treatment from my aunts and sisters. I don't need this from you. He childishly pointed at her, even jumping up on the pile of cushions he had on his chair, much to his earlier embarrassment. Fufu. All right, the goddess raised her hands in surrender before adopting a more serious expression. Speaking of siblings, what are you going to do about mine? She asked with narrowed eyes. Zetsu blinked before he realized who she meant. Yours? Ah, you mean Demeter. Right. He scratched his green hair and thought, to be honest, I was hoping to wait until the whole thing blows over, but yeah. Our best option is to meet her and clear the air. So you'll take responsibility for it? The brunette asked him skeptically. Pops didn't raise no, was Zetsu fired back. Besides, I'll do it, but obviously not now. Unless you can get her here to avoid attracting unwanted attention. Hestia thought about the request and shook her head. That wouldn't be possible. She refuses to come out of her temple and has become more antisocial than my nephew, the goddess said with a sigh. The Uzumaki scratched his head at that bit. Huh? I turned a goddess into a hikikomori, he said in shock. Hestia was confused at the foreign term, but having a feeling it wasn't a compliment, she went with her gut instinct and pinched her fellow immortal's cheek painfully. Ouch. This isn't a joking matter, mister. Your lucky Hermes was blamed for your stunt. And even then, I'm not comfortable at all with my nephew being the scapegoat for your crime, she told him sternly, even pinching both his cheeks and stretching his face out. But Hestia am a fiction it. He mumbled unintelligibly, prompting the goddess to let him go. Pardon? She asked. I said I'm fixing it. Zetsu rubbed his cheeks and glared at her. How? Well, this looks amazing, Ria. Naruto picked up some of the noodles, opting to use the cutlery he was given instead of chopsticks. He wanted to be polite, and the utensils were too funny. May the fork be with you. Ha! Genius! Well then I'm sure the taste will be something you won't forget, Ria tittered from her side on the table, with a glass of nectar in hand and a small plate with small red-orange cubes next to her. With that, both immortals took a bite, or in Ria's case, a dip, and a sip, of their respective treats, and moaned in delight. This is so good. The blonde held his whiskered cheeks while his eyes closed in bliss, even ditching his table manners momentarily. Ria had done a marvelous job. The noodles were perfectly steamed, and absorbed just enough of the broth to give them a slight flavor, all the while being just chewy enough to complement the shrimp and… Oh, you didn't, you sly minx, the man thought in mirth upon spotting a few naridamakis floating in the mix. Sure, it was a common ingredient in Japan, but something tells him his new friend had every intention of landing that particular pun. The ramen itself was nothing overly fancy, the ingredients were common, or even basic. But the level of care that went into preparing them was phenomenal, especially considering he could tell almost all the ingredients were homemade, from the ramen noodles to the fish cakes. Yes, it wasn't the same as the authentic ramen he'd grown to love, or addicted to according to anyone who knew him, but it safely secured itself on his top 3 favorite dishes of all time. The other 2 spots were occupied by 2 old friends of his. Even 12,000 years after they passed, Old Man Tucci and Big Sis Iam's ramen remains the best. Either way, Naruto was more than satisfied. Ria was a great gal. Looking to the side, he was glad Zetsu was talking animatedly with Hestia as well. He might have to introduce her to his little girls, they'd love her. Quatsi might try to wrestle her though. His little serpent tended to do that to everyone. The ex-Titan Queen for her part had a more subdued but equally pleased reaction, so much so she didn't reprimand her guest for speaking with his mouth full. According to the man, his peculiar fire melon gave off a bit of a strong taste, one that could be comparable to very strong liquor even if it did not have any alcohol. It was thus perfect to pair with nectar, or any sweet drink really, to enjoy the experience fully. And enjoy she did. She couldn't wait to taste the others. She and Hestia hadn't planned on eating any more than a small quantity, opting to leave the lion's share of the food for their guests. Thank you for the kind words, Naruto, she smiled at him. Honesty's the best policy, heh? Do you think you can make me some again? The man asked her, no trace of shame on his face. Why, of course. You can come by any time. Oh. She suddenly sat up excitedly and gestured to a nearby closet. I should have asked this before, but do you like board games? We could have some after dinner. She swayed in her seat from excitement. Oh. She couldn't wait to have a pun-off in Scrabble. No one ever did it with her anymore. Heh. You kidding? I love those. Although I'm a bit of go-man myself, I do got a collection back home. Need to stave off the boredom sometimes. He rubbed his chin before gaining what Ria could only describe as a 1,000-mile stare, but no monopoly. Oh? She was intrigued now. Ya can have another Reign of Zetsu incident again. The man waved her off with a troubled expression. There was definitely a juicy story behind that. Ho. Tell me more. She prodded. While Naruto raised a finger. You what? A yell from the side interrupted him, and made Ria spill her nectar in surprise. What's going on there? You kids getting along? Naruto asked, looking surprised as Hestia hoisted Zetsu by the front of his shirt, foregoing any social etiquette. Your son here just told me he's sent thousands of clones over the country. Are you two trying to start a war? The goddess turned to the sage with a glare, while Ria adopted a similarly shocked expression. What? The Titaness abruptly got out of her seat. Naruto's eyes widened at the accusation before he stood up with his hands raised in the air. Alright, wait, just wait for a darn minute. This is just a misunderstanding, the man said placatingly. Oh, there better be a damn good explanation for this, Ria thought while folding her arms across her chest and adopting a stern expression. You have an army within our territory. How do you think the others are going to understand this? The green-eyed Titaness asked, already knowing the answer. Little Sparky would lose his marbles. Scratch that, she had a feeling her little moon pie and Guppy would too. It's not an army though. It's a search party. Naruto's voice cut through her thoughts, but it was Hestia who replied to him, still holding the other Uzumaki like a ragdoll. What would be so important it'd need so much effort? She said with more heat than Ria was used to hearing from her. Pun intended, now wasn't the time. Focus, woman. Naruto seemed to gain a nervous expression, and with squinted eyes, he stammered an answer. Well, you see, it's that one sheep god. Sheep god? The Titaness racked her head for an answer, and she could see her daughter in a similar state of confusion. Pan. Pops means Pan. I'm looking for Pan. The greenette said with a sigh before muttering, and its goat god under his breath. Both women didn't hear him, however, they were both too shocked to comment. Eh? Was the only thing they could utter. Zetsu Gaiden, The Hunt, Quest for Pan Part 2. Somewhere in the Midwest. Oi, did you hear the news? About Zetsu? Say7120 kept babbling about it. Apparently, the first 2 clones are gonna be here for this 1 foot. Oof, sounds like this is important. A horde of Zetsu clones marched silently in a single file line through a small tunnel hundreds of feet underground. It was obviously one made just for the little Immortal, as it barely allowed any movement beyond going forward. There was no audible chatter among them. Any and all conversations were done telepathically to avoid detection. The many clones were currently congregating into a much larger underground room, one about the size of a football field. Just as before, no sound was made, except for some typing noises in a corner of the room that went largely ignored. Zetsu Chatram 42, attention! A single Zetsu wearing a fedora walked on a small stage in the middle of the room. HAIZ 42 was the single shared reply of the thousands in attendance, making the moderator hold their head in pain. Stop spamming, the mod, Zetsu yelled back, only to receive another headache. Alright, he finally snapped as the other clones shut up. I don't know if you're all aware, but we've got a special guest today. Please stay silent in appreciation for the eldest clone and our leader next to Original, and Original's pops with that piece. Zay-42 came down to stand next to the others. More typing ensued. A new Zetsu melded out of the wall adjacent to the stage, looking the same as all the others with the exception of a green cloak with the number 2 on the back. The Zetsu clone took his place and looked at all the others in attendance. Hello everyone, I'd like to thank you for answering these summons. Now I'll be honest and say the only reason I even came here specifically and not the other 50 rooms is that it was the closest Zay2 could taste the disappointment in his audience but soldiered on. He snapped his fingers as one of the Zetsus in the middle, this one wearing a neon green security jacket, turned on a projector. A PowerPoint was shown on the wall, the title of it being Hunting a God, a retrospective. In any case, I've come to bring you all a progress report to avoid any disorganization. As you know, we've started this project on the 16th of September, which means exactly 11 days ago. As of now, we've spread out to the 4 corners of the United States, with 3 extra cells going to Alaska, Hawaii and Puerto Rico. The clone snapped his finger again, making his assistant switch from a slide that showed a progress graph to 3 different pictures. One showed a clone in a fur coat sitting on the edge of a fishing hole, another showed a clone in a volcanic suit holding a stick with a ridiculous amount of hot dogs over a pool of lava, and a third showed a clone sitting in a lawn chair. Some of the audience chuckled. Type. Zay2 ignored the background noise and continued, now that we're more spread out and with around 552 of us on the job, we should have a much easier time finding Pan. He could see many of the clones were spotting confident smiles and elbowing one another, giggling lowly all the while. But we hit a small roadblock. A slide appeared showing a massive map of the United States, with several XS and OS all over it. We seem to have all encountered the same issue. We can sense and even find large pools of nature energy, but they all seem to disappear. As you all know, energy cannot simply vanish, unless we're talking about space-time travel, which is what I will get into, he explained, even showing a slide with a picture of Albert Einstein and some equations next to it. Our initial team, consisting of Zay-342 through 50, was enlarged to include several more research squads. Type. They all tackled the same issues. First attempting to find a pattern, then attempting to find a common cause. He showed the appropriate slides, his eyebrow twitching all the while. The first issue was a lost cause. The pattern was deemed to be completely random and unpredictable, but the second? At this statement, Zay2 smiled almost ferally. That's where we had our breakthrough, he proclaimed as many in the audience looked at each other with excitement. One of the teams found a small, almost imperceptible amount of space-time energy being used at the center of each of those fields. And after looking into it, the eldest clone showed a slide with a picture of a rock with an engraved delta on it. Type. Is what we found, he finished with a shaky sigh, prompting some silent fist pumps in the audience. So with that said, all that's left is goddammit, who the hell is doing this? Zay2 finally exploded at the incessant noise. A Zetsu clone sitting on a desk in the corner looked up from his work. This one sported a large feminine blonde wig and was using an honest-to-God typewriter. What the hell are you doing? The eldest clone asked incredulously. The Zetsu clone blushed before hesitantly tearing off the long piece of paper he'd been working on. Nothing. That's it for part 2. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video.